The arrival of Caitlin Clark into the Women's National Basketball Association in 2024 was not merely the drafting of a player, it was a cultural and economic singularity without precedent in the history of women's professional sports. While the league has harbored generational talents before, from the pioneering days of Sheryl Swoopes and Lisa Leslie to the modern dominance of Maya Moore and Aja Wilson, the integration of Clark precipitated a violent collision between two distinct operational eras. We witnessed the foundational epoch, characterized by collective struggle, incremental growth, and a protective insular culture, crashing headlong into the modern superstar epoch, an era driven by individual virality, explosive commercial interest, and the ruthless scrutiny of the mainstream sports media industrial complex. This is an exhaustive analysis of the structural, interpersonal, and economic frictions that emerged during this transition, a phenomenon widely categorized under the nomenclature of the gatekeeper narrative. This theoretical framework posits that established power brokers within the WNBA ecosystem, including head coaches like Cheryl Reeve, legends like Sheryl Swoopes, and institutions like USA Basketball, actively conspired to diminish Clark's immediate impact. This resistance was fueled by a complex amalgamation of professional jealousy, racial resentment, rigid adherence to traditional hierarchies, and a fundamental misunderstanding of the modern sports marketing landscape. We need to look closely at the soft quit hypothesis regarding the 2024 Paris Olympics, the specific mechanisms of media disinformation employed by league legends, the physical enforcement of unwritten rules on the court, and the staggering economic opportunity cost incurred by the league's resistance to its own greatest asset. By synthesizing media transcripts, statistical viewership data, and investigative reporting, we can establish a definitive historical record of the culture war that defined the 2024 WNBA season. The inciting incident for this entire narrative, the moment that transformed a standard personnel decision into a global referendum on marketing and meritocracy, was the exclusion of Caitlin Clark from the 2024 Team USA Olympic roster. USA Basketball defended this decision as a triumph of process over popularity. The selection committee, heavily influenced by the philosophy of head coach Cheryl Reeve, adhered to a rigid set of criteria that prioritized senior national team experience, training camp attendance, and defensive versatility. The official rationale was that Clark, who had missed the crucial April training camp due to her participation in the NCAA Final Four with Iowa, lacked the necessary chemistry with the established core of Aja Wilson, Breanna Stewart, and Diana Taurasi. However, this adherence to bureaucratic procedure was immediately challenged as a fundamental failure of strategic vision. Stephen A. Smith, utilizing his massive platform, characterized the decision as idiotic, arguing that it prioritized the internal comfort of the old guard over the exponential growth of the sport. The core of this argument rests on the specific context of Team USA's dominance. And, unlike the men's game, where the gap between the US and the world has narrowed significantly, the women's team has won 7 consecutive gold medals, often with margins of victory exceeding 30 points. In this context, the 11th and 12th spots on the roster are functionally irrelevant to the competitive outcome, but critically important to the cultural footprint of the team. The gatekeepers failed to recognize that the Olympics are not merely a basketball tournament, but a global marketing vehicle, by excluding the single most popular player in the history of the women's game, a player who had just drawn nearly 19 million viewers to an NCAA title game. The committee effectively chose to obscure the sport from millions of potential new fans. This decision was framed not as a basketball decision, but as marketing malpractice, a stubborn refusal to deviate from standard procedure even in the face of an anomalous, transformative talent. But there is a critical and underanalyzed component of the Olympic saga, the agency of Caitlin Clark herself. While the public narrative focused on her being snubbed, investigative reporting and a nuanced reading of the timeline suggest a counter-narrative, the soft quit. This theory posits that Clark, recognizing the institutional hostility and the lack of an enthusiastic welcome from the USA Basketball establishment, strategically withdrew from the process to protect her health and her brand. Reports from insiders confirmed that while Clark was left off the primary roster, she was positioned as a top alternate, essentially on call should a player be unable to compete. Furthermore, reports indicated that USA Basketball extended an invitation for Clark to participate in the 3x3 basketball tournament, a separate discipline within the Olympics. Clark's camp reportedly responded to the 3x3 inquiry with a firm no. This rejection is pivotal to understanding the power dynamics at play. The 3x3 game, while an Olympic sport, is viewed as a secondary tier of competition, often reserved for specialists or players not selected for the premier squad. For Clark, a generational talent whose game is predicated on full-court vision and transition passing, accepting a 3x3 slot would have been a demotion. It would have allowed USA Basketball to capitalize on her fame to boost ticket sales for a niche event without granting her the prestige of the main roster. By declining this consolation prize, Clark effectively soft-quit the Olympic cycle. She refused to be used as a marketing prop by an organization that did not value her enough to include her in the main event. This strategic withdrawal allowed her to rest during the month-long Olympic break, a crucial respite for a rookie who had played a continuous schedule from the collegiate season directly into the professional ranks without an off-season. The soft quit was a silent assertion of value. If the Gatekeepers did not want her on their terms, she would not be available on theirs. The existence of the alternate list adds another layer to this. Reports indicated that Clark and Breonna Jones were the top names on the contingency list. This placement was essentially a break glass in case of emergency option, designed to shield USA Basketball from criticism should an injury crisis occur. However, it also placed Clark in a precarious position. Accepting an alternate role would have required her to stay in peak physical condition, potentially travel to training camps or Paris, and remain in a state of readiness, all without the guarantee of playing time or a medal. Critics argued that this was another form of gatekeeping, keeping Clark in the orbit of the team to prevent the PR disaster of a total severance, but keeping her far enough away to ensure she did not disrupt the established hierarchy of the main roster. Clark's public comments, stating she was not disappointed and that the break gave her something to work for, were a masterclass in media management. By refusing to express public grievance, she avoided being labeled entitled by the veterans, while simultaneously allowing the media and fans to fight the battle on her behalf. The ultimate adjudication of the Gatekeeper decision came in the form of television ratings, providing irrefutable data regarding the opportunity cost incurred by USA Basketball. The Gatekeepers had argued that the integrity of the roster was paramount, and that the brand of Team USA was strong enough to stand on its own without the circus of Clarkmania. The data, however, told a different story. The 2024 Olympic gold medal game between Team USA and France drew an audience of approximately 7.8 million viewers. While this figure represented a strong showing for women's basketball in a vacuum comparable to the Tokyo final, it was a catastrophic underperformance when contextualized against the Clark economy. Just months prior, Caitlin Clark had led Iowa to an 18.9 million viewer audience in the NCAA championship game. This discrepancy of over 11 million viewers quantifies the specific cost of the gatekeeper mentality. The data suggests that by excluding Clark, USA Basketball failed to capture the massive casual audience that had been activated during the NCAA tournament. The Clark effect is not merely theoretical, it is a measurable economic force. When Clark plays, viewership doubles or triples. When she does not, viewership reverts to the mean. To understand the resistance, we must look at the architect, Minnesota Lynx head coach and Team USA head coach Cheryl Reeve. Reeve was cast in the role of antagonist by both circumstance and her own public communication strategy. A four-time WNBA champion coach with a reputation for prickly defensiveness regarding the league's media coverage, she became the face of the institutional pushback. The genesis of the friction can be traced to social media activity that predated the Olympic selection. In May 2024, as the WNBA preseason was commencing, the league's official promotional channels were heavily focused on the Indiana Fever and Clark's upcoming debut. Reeve, feeling that her team and other established franchises were being marginalized, took to X to voice her displeasure. She quoted a promotional post for a Fever game and added, "Also in action tonight, Minnesota Lynx versus Chicago Sky," punctuating the sentiment with the hashtag, "The W is more than one player." While factually accurate, the WNBA is indeed composed of 144 players, the timing and targeting of the tweet were interpreted by media analysts as a manifestation of deep-seated resentment. Critics argued that a sitting national team coach, who would soon be deciding the fate of the Olympic roster, publicly disparaging the marketing of a player in the selection pool demonstrated a disqualifying bias. The hashtag became a rallying cry for the Gatekeepers, a slogan that sounded inclusive on the surface, but functioned as a dismissal of the specific unique value that Clark brought to the ecosystem. It signaled a refusal to accept the star system marketing that has driven the growth of the NBA and an insistence on a more egalitarian, collective approach that, while noble in theory, had failed to drive significant viewership growth for 25 years. This tension culminated in a heated exchange with veteran sports journalist Christine Brennan. Brennan directly confronted Reeve about the impact of her social media commentary on the Olympic selection process. When asked if her tweets indicated a predisposition against Clark, Reeve dismissed the inquiry with palpable hostility, stating, "What you wrote is fiction," and refusing to engage with the substance of the question. This was not merely a coach brushing off a reporter, it was a clash of cultures. Brennan represented the mainstream sports media apparatus, intrusive, narrative-driven, and focused on the biggest story. Reeve represented the WNBA's bunker mentality, where difficult questions are viewed as attacks on the league's integrity. The situation escalated when the WNBA Players Association released a statement condemning Brennan's line of questioning as unprofessional and an attempt to manufacture drama. This institutional circling of the wagons reinforced the gatekeeper narrative, that the league protects its own and views objective scrutiny of its power brokers as a violation of the safe space culture it has cultivated. Following the backlash, Reeve deleted the controversial tweets, a move that was interpreted as an admission of guilt, spoliation of evidence in the court of public opinion. The deletion did not quell the controversy, rather it cemented the perception that Reeve knew her public stance was incompatible with her role as an impartial selector for Team USA. If Reeve managed the bureaucratic gates, WNBA legend Sheryl Swoopes managed the intellectual resistance. As a three-time MVP and the first player ever signed to the WNBA, Swoopes holds immense cultural authority. However, her repeated attempts to diminish Caitlin Clark's achievements through factually incorrect statements transformed her from a revered icon into a symbol of generational bitterness. The controversy ignited during Swoopes' appearance on a podcast where she engaged in a sustained dismantling of Clark's validity, relying on a series of verifiable falsehoods. She confidently stated that Clark was a 25-year-old playing against 20-year-olds, implying that her physical maturity was the primary driver of her dominance. In reality, Clark was 22 years old at the time. Swoopes claimed that Clark had utilized an extra COVID year of eligibility to break the scoring record. In fact, Clark broke the record in her fourth year, playing the same number of seasons as the previous record holder. Swoopes asserted that Clark took 40 shots a game, painting a picture of a selfish chucker. Statistical analysis showed Clark averaged roughly 20 shots per game. This was not merely a difference of opinion, it was disinformation. The precision of the falsehoods suggested a motivated reasoning designed to protect the legacy of Swoopes' own era. The gatekeeper here was functioning as a revisionist historian, attempting to overwrite the reality of the present to preserve the sanctity of the past. Following the inevitable backlash, Swoopes retreated to a defense that introduced a volatile racial dynamic to the conversation, stating, "Black people can't be racist." This statement acted as an accelerant. Stephen A. Smith and other commentators seized upon this as evidence of the racial resentment simmering beneath the surface. Smith argued that Swoopes was using socio-political theory to shield herself from criticism for what was, objectively, a hater take. By invoking race, Swoopes inadvertently validated the Great White Hope narrative, framing the resistance to Clark not just as basketball competitiveness, but as a racial turf war. In an attempt to quell the firestorm, Swoopes claimed to have reached out to Clark privately to apologize, later releasing screenshots of these text messages on social media. This move backfired spectacularly, viewed as performative and self-serving. The consequences materialized in the broadcast booth. Swoopes, who served as an analyst for the Dallas Wings, was notably removed from the broadcast team for a highly anticipated game against the Indiana Fever. Media insiders highlighted this as an institutional admission that Swoopes could no longer be trusted to call a Clark game objectively. While Reeve and Swoopes managed the narrative, a faction of players served as the physical enforcers. The most prominent example was Chennedy Carter. During a regular season game between the Chicago Sky and the Indiana Fever, Carter delivered a hard blindside hip check to Caitlin Clark while the ball was out of play. The foul was flagged as a flagrant one, but the context was damning. This was not a basketball play. It was a targeted strike on an unsuspecting player, delivered away from the action, a physical assertion of dominance designed to intimidate. In the post-game press conference, Carter refused to answer any questions regarding Clark, stating, "I ain't answering no Caitlin Clark questions." This refusal to acknowledge the opponent struck many as petty and indicative of a deep-seated personal animus. Stephen A. Smith utilized the Carter incident as the definitive proof of his jealousy thesis. He argued that players like Carter, who had struggled to find a permanent home in the league, were using physical aggression against Clark as a means of generating relevance. The data supported this cynical take. Carter saw a massive spike in social media engagement following the incident. The gatekeeper economy had created a perverse incentive structure where attacking the golden goose was the fastest path to fame for lesser-known players. Ultimately, the gatekeeper narrative is a story of economic irrationality. The television ratings for the 2024 season reveal a stark bifurcation in the WNBA product. There is the Caitlin Clark WNBA and the standard WNBA. Games featuring the Indiana Fever consistently drew audiences in the millions, while games not featuring Clark, though improved, averaged a fraction of that. This data exposes the fallacy of the gatekeeper logic. When Cheryl Reeve or Sheryl Swoopes argue for a more egalitarian distribution of marketing, they are arguing for a strategy that yields 500,000 viewers over a strategy that yields 2 million. The market had spoken unequivocally. Caitlin Clark was the product. The economic friction extended to corporate partners as well. Reports confirmed that despite signing a massive endorsement deal, Caitlin Clark's signature Nike shoe would not be released until 2026. This delay was interpreted by industry analysts as a sign of Nike's own gatekeeping, a reluctance to fast-track a rookie ahead of established Nike athletes like Aja Wilson and Sabrina Ionescu, who had waited years for their own signature lines. This corporate hesitation mirrors the league's hesitation, a fear of upsetting the existing hierarchy, even at the cost of capitalizing on lightning in a bottle. However, not every veteran remained rigid. Diana Taurasi, the league's all-time leading scorer, initially warned that reality is coming for Clark, a comment pilloried as a bitter wish for failure. But as the season progressed and Clark proved her mettle, Taurasi pivoted. By the end of the season, she joked, "Reality is coming to me now," acknowledging her own aging game and the undeniable talent of the incoming generation. This evolution demonstrates that the gatekeeper stance was not immutable. It could be broken by performance. The 2024 WNBA season serves as a definitive case study in the friction of transition. The gatekeeper narrative rests on a foundation of verifiable facts: the bureaucratic exclusion from the Olympics, the intellectual dishonesty of legends, the hostility of coaches, and the physical hazing on the court. Stephen A. Smith's crusade to expose these dynamics was a necessary spotlight on a league culture that had become too insular for its own good. The soft quit of Caitlin Clark regarding the Olympics was the pivot point, the moment the superstar realized she did not need the establishment as much as the establishment needed her. Ultimately, the data suggests that the gatekeepers failed in their primary objective. They could not stop Clark's ascent, nor could they dampen her popularity. Instead, they succeeded only in casting themselves as the villains in the story of the league's explosion. By trying to lock the gate, they simply forced the fans to tear down the wall. The Caitlin Clark era is not coming, it is here, and the gatekeepers are now standing in the rubble of the old world.